right, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders, obviously coming off of a massive road victory of the hated division rival Kansas City Chiefs and really imposed their will defensively. That obviously was the reason the Raiders won. And we're starting to see some serious momentum involving Antonio Pierce becoming the next head coach long term for the Las Vegas Raiders. There have been some rumors, there have been some reports kind of outside the organization, but Devontae Adams came out with some really interesting comments recently that I think highlights the direction that Antonio Pierce is heading in, which I believe is the next head coach of the Raiders long term. Let's get into the report, then we'll talk about it more on the other side. This is from SI.com. Las Vegas Raiders interim head coach Antonio Pierce took a huge leap in his running for the Raiders' permanent head coaching job when he defeated the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, at Arrowhead Stadium on Christmas Day. Raiders All-Pro wide receiver Devontae Adams, who knows a thing or two about what it takes to win from his 8 years with the Green Bay Packers, is one of the primary supporters. Here's some key comments here. I don't know if the team's like, oh, let's go and ball out for AP to get the job, Adams told reporters Wednesday. That's not really the thought process of the guys. It's more about playing hard as you can for the man himself. And then those things kind of work themselves out. So it's definitely gave him a better shot, and I'm definitely rooting for him. I mean, I love the guy. I love what he's brought. His mentality, his passion for the game is undeniable. You can see it every single day. His evolution as far as even speaking to the team and just got the head coaches of the deal is something that you kind of got to learn and kind of come into on your own. All right, so I think there's a couple key things here to unpack. Number one is Antonio Pierce is growing already as a head coach. And I think that's a key sign if you're looking for a young head coaching candidate for the future. You want a guy who can grow into the job, not kind of stuck in their ways. You know who was really stuck in their ways and was a disaster? Josh McDaniels, right? So you can make the same argument for Gruden during his time as a Raiders head coach. You have a guy here in Antonio Pierce who is growing, becoming a better head coach by the day, and the players are noticing that and they're buying in. And I think the other second point here to really highlight is that Devontae Adams right now is not necessarily playing to have Antonio Pierce get the job, but he loves the energy and mentality that Antonio Pierce is bringing to the Raiders team as a whole. And I think that's key because sometimes some of these interim guys, they just become like really rah-rah guys and the players are like, yeah, we love him so much. You know, we really want him to get the job. And sometimes that's not a good sign. That means sometimes the coach is really easy on the players and the players are just looking for a comfortable ride. Devontae Adams is saying here pretty clearly that he likes what Antonio Pierce is doing as a whole, not necessarily that it's easy or better for the players, but that they're buying into what he's developing as a program and a culture. And I think that's a great sign for the Raiders. And the fact that Devontae Adams is being very public about it, I think is an indication that the Raiders as an organization are probably going to really look forward to hiring Antonio Pierce. I think there's a strong chance of it happening for him to be their permanent head coach. Myers, I'm curious what your thoughts are on these comments by Devontae Adams and everything with the Raiders right now. But first, Raider Nation, look, you got a chance to make the playoffs, and it all starts this coming weekend against the Indianapolis Colts. A big game, big time AFC playoff implications. Give us your prediction, Raiders Colts, in the comment section below. But Miles, what are your thoughts on this report and everything with Antonio Pierce right now?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I think there's a couple of things that you touched on that were key points for me. The first one being is how Devontae Adams talks about the development of a guy like Antonio Pierce. And you brought up this about guys stuck in their ways. Pierce seems like a guy, like you said, there's two things he said. One, people come in, rah rah, ice cream parties, whatever, for the guys, like to get everybody on their side. Antonio Pierce came in and he's not just trying to coast through and be like, look, the guys love me, get me for the job. He's already taking the job seriously and changing and developing as head coach as if he already has the job. Of course, we know that he doesn't, but that's how you want your head coach to be. You want someone with confidence who comes in, they know they can be a head coach, they think that they're the best candidate for the job, and now they're coming in and they're not just doing the same thing for the last couple weeks of the year and then hope they get the job and figure it all out afterwards. He's already coming in, he's changing how he does things, he's changing how he talks to the players, he's developing, he's growing. So I really like that aspect in things, and I like what that is that he is doing here as far as just a guy that really seems passionate and confident that he is the right candidate for the job. Now, the other thing Adam says that I really like is just he says he brings the energy, his passion, the mentality that he brought. We've seen a big culture shift for the Raiders in the last few weeks. This is a team who kind of seemed pitiful throughout parts of the early season. It wasn't a team that really had that dog in them. Wasn't a team that go out and like fight you. You really it reminds me of like a Ravens, like a 49ers team now, where it's like this is a team you don't want to play. They're very physical. They've got that edge. They've got an attitude to them in a good way. This is a team that really can either make a really miraculous run to the playoffs, which I think is a very good possibility, or they can play spoiler for a lot of teams as far as they are going to be a team you don't want to come into. So I think this is really good stuff coming out of the Raiders organization. I think Antonio Pierce may be the right guy for the job. And I just really like that Devontae Adams has come out and spoken for the head coach as, the de facto team leader. I think all of this is a really good sign for the Las Vegas Raiders.
And there's one more point to hit on, Miles. I think it's something that people are kind of slippy on when you hear Devontae Adams say these things, and you're like, well, why, maybe he's just a guy, he's a team guy supporting Antonio Pierce. Here's the reality of it in the NFL. It is very rare that you have a player from the opposite side of the ball that the interim head coach is coming from saying things like this, right? It wouldn't be surprised, for example, if Jones or Max Crosby had come out and said, we love Antonio Pierce. He's a defensive guy. He was an NFL defensive linebacker for a long time, obviously a defensive coach. Devontae Adams obviously doesn't play defense. So I think that's what really jumps out at me here is that Antonio Pierce, what he's doing from a coaching perspective, he's not just unleashing the defense. He's not just doing some good things in terms of making the team win football games and force more turnovers. He's getting buy-in from the opposite side of the ball. And that is really, really, really hard to do because offensive and defensive players traditionally have different mentalities. It was like that when I played in college. Defensive guys had their own mindset. Offensive guys had their other mindset. And it was kind of a separation there, really hard gap to bridge sometimes. The fact that Antonio Pierce has bridged the gap with a guy like Devontae Adams, to me, is a great sign that, number one, he would be a good head coach long-term for the Raiders, but two, the fact that the Raiders are actually actively allowing him to do that. Because you better believe if Davis or whoever didn't really want to seriously consider Antonio Pierce, they would shut some of that down. They'd have an offensive guy just stick with the offense, kind of separate the team. We see that all the time in interim situations. We're not seeing that from the Raiders. I think, to me, that's an indicator that the Raiders are really strongly considering Antonio Pierce to be the permanent head coach. And look, based on the results the second half of the season, they really should. He looks like a great fit for this organization.